3, 2, 1.
Well, welcome back to our podcast. My name is Caden,
And I'm Kara.
and this is our final podcast for our business law class. And while we were thinking about what topics we wanted to talk about, we decided on sexual harassment and discrimination. Kara, why did we decide on this topic?
We decided on this topic because it wasn't talked too deeply in our textbook, but it was definitely a topic that's continuing to grow all over the US. And so we just wanted to deep dive how harassment in the workplace ties into business law.
Yeah, it's very, very relevant. I feel like a lot of people are talking about it right now, and rightfully so. It's a very pertinent thing. And when most people hear the phrase workplace harassment, they picture something dramatic, someone yelling, someone making an obvious inappropriate comment. But honestly, a lot of the time it's not dramatic at all. You see, harassment, it can be subtle, it can be quiet, and sometimes it's so normalized within a workplace that people don't even realize it's happening.
Exactly. And even though we have major federal laws meant to protect employees, like the Civil Rights Act and the Americans with Disability Act, millions of people still deal with harassment or discrimination every single year. It affects their mental health, their safety, their confidence, and even their career paths.
And so today we're going to be breaking down two things. We're going to be breaking down harassment and discrimination. They're connected, but they're not the same. Harassment is one form of discrimination, but discrimination includes a whole range of unfair treatment.
And we're going to be focusing specifically on what happens in the workplace. That includes everything from small businesses to big corporations, and also even environments like college athletic programs. We're going to be talking about what the law says, what rights workers have, and what responsibilities employers have to that they're supposed to uphold.
And this is something that affects far more people than most of us ever even realize. Most employees who experience harassment, they never report it. They're scared of retaliation, or they think nothing will change, or they worry that they'll be labeled as a problem.
And even when you're not the one being targeted, you still feel the impact. The vibe of the whole workplace shifts. People walk on eggshells, they avoid certain coworkers, or they shut down emotionally just to get through the day. We've seen it ourselves, and we've heard a lot of stories from other people as well.
Yeah, it's really relevant right now, and it's something that we've both experienced personally. And before we get into real life examples and stories, though, we need a foundation. So, Kara, what actually counts as harassment under the law, and what does discrimination really mean?
So that's where the EEOC, that stands for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, comes in. So they're a federal agency that enforces these laws. They make sure that employees are protected from being mistreated because of things like race, religion, disability, sex, age, and a lot of other things as well. So, really, to understand everything else in this episode, we have to start with those legal definitions.
So, here's how this episode is going to go. First, we're going to break down what harassment is from a legal standpoint, kind of going back over what we talked about a little bit. Then we're going to move into discrimination, what it looks like, and how it actually shows up in the workplace.
And then after that, we're going to share some real examples, including some personal experiences and situations from athletics. Then we're going to talk about the impact emotionally, spiritually, and even financially on both of those individuals and the organizations.
And we'll wrap up with prevention, what employees should be doing to create safe, respectful, and fair workplaces. Before we get deeper into the examples, let's lay the groundwork and talk about what harassment actually means under US law. Because people use the word all the time, but the legal definition is a lot more specific than most people realize.
Yeah, so the EEOC gives a pretty clear definition. They say harassment is unwelcome conduct based on protected characteristics like race, sex, disability, age, religion, and so on. And if that behavior is severe or happens often enough that it affects someone's ability to work or perform, it can violate the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the ADEA or the ADA.
And according to the EEOC, harassment is legally considered a form of discrimination. It violates federal law when it creates what's called a hostile work environment or when it results in a negative employment action, like being fired, demoted, or losing opportunities. That comes straight from the EEOC's description of harassment, which is based on Title VII and reinforced by the Civil Rights Act of 1991.
And the 1991 Act is really important here because it strengthens the penalties. It allows employees to actually seek compensation and punitive damages for the harassment and the discrimination. Something Luiso, Calhoun, and Hughes talk about in the Essentials of Business Law on page 525.
So the law recognizes two big categories of harassment: hostile work environment and quid pro quo. A hostile work environment is when somebody's behavior is so severe or so constant that it changes the conditions of someone's job.
A good example of this is the Supreme Court case Harris versus Forklift Systems from 1993. In that case, the court said that you don't have to have a nervous breakdown or lose your job for harassment to be illegal. If the environment is abusive or intimidating, that's enough.
And then there's quid pro quo harassment, which basically means this for that. That was the issue in cases like Meritor Savings Bank versus Vincent in 1986. The Supreme Court made it clear that if someone in authority pressures an employee for sexual favors in exchange for job security or promotion, that's illegal. Period.
And just to clear up any misconception, not everything unpleasant is harassment under the law. Someone being rude or strict isn't automatically breaking the law. It has to be tied to a protected category, or it has to be serious enough to meet those hostile environment standards.
But again, that doesn't mean it's okay. It just means that legal threshold is high, which is why so many people think, well, maybe this doesn't count. A lot of people minimize it because they don't want to be seen as dramatic or sensitive. Harassment can show up in really subtle ways. For example, constant comments about someone's race or disability, even disguised as jokes, or repeatedly misgendering or mocking someone's accent.
And sometimes it's targeted, like in the Farragher versus City of Boca Raton and the Burlington Industries versus Ellerth, both from 1998. Those cases establish that employers are automatically responsible when their supervisors harass their employees.
It also includes things like unwanted sexual comments, locker room talk, or coworkers who make someone's disability their punchlines at the jokes. The EEOC actually gives examples just like that in their harassment guidelines.
One of the biggest problems is that people often don't realize that they're experiencing harassment. Maybe it starts small or maybe it's been normalized in that workplace. After a while, it just feels like something you're supposed to put up with.
Or oftentimes they're told they're overreacting. But when you look at the law, cases like Onkale versus Sundowner Offshore Services in 1998, the Supreme Court says that harassment can come from anything, even people of the same sex. The point is whether the behavior is abusive, not who's doing it. So, that's the big picture of harassment. That's the legal definition, the types, and how it shows up in real life. And the main takeaway is that it's not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's just woven into the culture.
And that leads us right into the next part, which is discrimination. Because harassment is just one category, discrimination includes a whole range of unfair treatment at work.
So let's get into that. All right, now that we've laid out the legal definitions and talked about what harassment looks like on paper, let's shift into what it looks like in the real workplace, because the laws are important, but they really come alive when you hear how these situations play out in real people's lives.
And honestly, these examples just show you how complicated and painful these situations can be. It's one thing to read a definition, and it's another to watch it happen in someone's life that you care about or you go through it yourself.
The EEOC gets tens of thousands of discrimination and harassment complaints every year, and that's only the people who report it. Studies show that the majority of people who experience harassment never file a formal complaint, usually out of fear of retaliation or believing that nothing will change.
Retaliation is actually the number one most common charge filed with the EEOC. It shows up in more cases than discrimination based on race, sex, disability, or anything else. People are scared that they'll lose their job or be treated even worse if they speak up.
And sometimes their fear is justified. Courts have dealt with plenty of retaliation cases. For example, Burlington Northern and Santa Fe Railway Co. versus White in 2006. The Supreme Court ruled that retaliation doesn't just mean firing someone. It can be any action that would deter a reasonable employee from reporting harassment. That could be schedule changes, extra scrutiny, taking away responsibility. All of these things count.
So, I'm going to talk a little bit about a personal example that I've seen play out in my sister's workplace. She has a disability and she's also Asian ethnicity. And so, during that time when she was working there was an employee who bullied her on the basis of race and another um, coworker there of the same race. And the one ended up actually quitting because it got that bad. My sister was miserable and it definitely put an emotional weight on her. And then he also went even further to make fun of and bully her for her disability, even to the point of taking away her mobility device, which was her cane.
So, with all of this, was there ever something that your sister did to like formally file a complaint? Did she take steps of action?
She definitely ended up having a conversation with her store manager and explained kind of the situation and what happened.
Mm.
Apparently, he had some kind of conversation with that employee, and my sister said things got better for maybe a few weeks, but then it kind of just went right back to it. And she ended up facing just the decision on if she should quit or remain there miserable. But at some point, after waiting out a little while, he ended up quitting himself. So.
Yeah. And that's just the really hard reality of like the real world implication of all of this. Like just how we just talked about, like the reason people don't file these things is a fear of scrutiny, discrimination, even further, or the fact that something might not change. And so that's the hard reality that some things may not change if the processes aren't handled accordingly. And you see, it's not just one or two isolated stories. I've personally experienced a mild level of discrimination too at a small coffee shop I worked at back home. There I was the only male employee, and the message from the manager, like when I started, the reason I wanted to work there was that everyone is equal, but the reality, it didn't really match that. You see, my supervisor would bring up negative experiences she had with other men and then direct that energy specifically towards me, almost as like I was standing in for every guy who'd ever annoyed her. And this is a really classic example of desperate treatment based on sex, which voids Title VII. And there was also the religious side of it too. I was told at the beginning that I was not to give faith based answers to customers because it supposedly made the other employees uncomfortable, except I talked to all my other customers and employees, and nobody ever vocalized that they were uncomfortable. And meanwhile, the other employees talked about their personal topics that made me uncomfortable, but nothing was ever mentioned. And this inconsistency was just another red flag for discrimination. You see, as I was researching this further, a similar issue came up in the EEOC versus Abercrombie and Finch in 2015. There was a Netflix documentary done on it and everything. You see, the Supreme Court said employees can't refuse to accommodate religious expression, even if an employee never uses the exact words, I need a religious accommodation. The responsibility is on the employer to avoid discrimination.
Another big area where harassment shows up is athletics, especially college sports. The power dynamic between a coach and a player can make those boundaries really complicated and confusing.
Exactly. We've seen this play out at MOBAP. All these other schools have seen it play out, and the court has actually addressed this pretty clearly in the Simpsons versus University of Colorado Boulder, a 2007 case where the university was found potentially liable for a hostile environment because they didn't take action after knowing about a pattern of misconduct involving athletes. Even though the harassment wasn't from an employee, the school still had a duty to protect students and athletes.
And it's not always dramatic incidents. Sometimes it's comments about an athlete's body, pressure to meet with a coach alone, or manipulative behavior disguised as motivation. And players are often afraid to speak up because of their scholarship or their playing time is on the line.
What all these examples have in common, your sister's experience, mine, the athletic cases that we talked about, is that they highlight how harassment and discrimination, they often go unchecked unless somebody pushes back. And even then, it's not always taken seriously.
And that's why those landmarks Supreme Court cases matter so much. Meritor, Frager, Ellerth, Harris, all of them created the legal standards that we'll use today. They tell employers that they are responsible for stopping harassment and you don't get to just look the other way.
And the Civil Rights Act of 1991 adds another layer. It gives victims the right to seek damages, not just back pay, but emotional distress damages and even punitive damages when employers' actions are especially harmful. The law is the reason many of these cases ever made it to the court. So these stories show how harassment and discrimination actually play out in the workplace, not just on paper, but in real people's lives.
And the impacts go way beyond the moment. Harassment affects people emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and even financially. And companies pay a price too: turnover, lawsuits, bad culture, you name it.
And that's where we're headed next: how harassment affects individuals and organizations. So before we wrap up, there's one more piece we want to talk about. We shared the definition, the laws, and the real examples, but it's worth asking why harassment still happens so often. Because with all these laws in place, you'd think workplaces would have this figured out by now.
And honestly, a lot of it comes down to workplace culture. You can definitely have a written policy sitting in a binder, but if people don't feel safe to speak up or if managers look the other way, those policies don't really mean much.
Exactly, Kara. Courts have made it clear that employers can't just say, well, we had a policy, so we're fine. In cases like Fargo versus Ellerth, the Supreme Court basically said having a policy, it really isn't enough. Employees have to actively prevent harassment and actually enforce their policies.
And prevention is really the key. The EEOC talks about this all the time. The most effective workplaces are the ones where reporting a concern isn't treated like stirring the pot, but it's maintaining a respectful environment.
That means more than just training. It means leaders modeling good behavior, calling things out early, and making sure there are real consequences when someone crosses the line.
It also means creating a space for people to speak up before things get serious. Open communication, clear HR paths, anonymous reporting options, and managers who actually listen. Those are the things that stop harassment before it reaches legal levels.
And here's the thing: good prevention protects everyone: the people who feel targeted, the people witnessing it, and even the people who could be falsely accused. And that's why those structures matter.
And at the end of the day, a safe workplace isn't just a legal issue, it's a moral one. People deserve to feel respected, protected, and valued when they're at work. It makes the workplace healthier, and honestly, it just makes people better at their jobs.
So, as we wrap this up, we'll move into what all of this means for employees and employers and what you can actually do if you find yourself in one of these situations. So, let's talk about the part people really want to know. What can you actually do if you're dealing with harassment and discrimination at work? As we've been talking, me and Kara have recorded countless times where we've experienced this personally or have other people who have experienced this as well. And how does this actually apply? Because it can feel overwhelming, especially when you're not sure what your rights are.
And the first thing is this: document everything. Write down dates, times, what happened, who was there, and how it made you feel. Courts and the EEOC look at patterns.
The second thing that's really important is to check your company's policy. Most employers are legally required to have one, and following the reporting steps they outline is usually part of protecting your rights. Even in big cases like Fargo versus Ellerth, the Supreme Court said employees should use the reporting systems available to them. And this goes for not only employees, but athletes, coaches, trainers. This goes for so many different groups of people.
So, thirdly, if you feel safe to report it, that could mean going to your supervisor, HR, or sometimes even a designated harassment officer. And remember, retaliation for reporting is illegal. When mentioned in the Burlington Northern case earlier, it proved that retaliation can be anything that would make a reasonable person scared to speak up. So, retaliation is something you can report to.
Fourth, if reporting inside your workplace doesn't help, or if it gets worse, you can go directly to the EEOC. Anyone can file a charge online, and it doesn't cost anything. Sometimes that's what finally gets an employer to take things seriously.
And the last thing is this: don't go through it alone. Talk to someone you trust, whether that's a friend, counselor, mentor, or even a lawyer if the situation is serious. These situations are emotionally draining and support really matters.
The bottom line overall is that you have legal rights. You deserve to feel safe at work, and there are systems in place to help each and every one of us. Even though it can feel scary to take a step, take that first step and move forward. So, as we wrap up today's episode, we hope this conversation made something really clear. Harassment and discrimination aren't always dramatic, but their impact is. And whether it's subtle comments, biased treatment, or full on hostile behavior, none of it is something you have to put up with.
We've talked about laws, the cases, the personal stories, and real human cost. And the biggest takeaway is that awareness matters. Knowing what your rights are and what employers are responsible for is the first step towards a safer workplace.
And it's not just on the people experiencing the harassment. Everyone here has a part to play in creating a respectful work environment. Speaking up, supporting others, and challenging harmful behavior can make a huge difference.
And at the end of the day, everyone deserves a workplace where they feel respected, valued, and protected, not just legally, but personally as well. And the more we talk about this, the closer we get to making that the norm instead of the exception.
So, thanks for listening to our podcast. Thanks for hanging out with us today and for diving into a tough but important topic.
We hope this helps you better understand the signs, the laws, and the steps you can take, whether you're dealing with this yourself or supporting someone who is.
Take care of yourself and each other, and we'll see you next time.